Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Beth Noy, and I'm a designer with the Raleigh's Urban Design Center. We would like to welcome you to this season's last UDC talk. We will be taking a break over the summer and will resume in the fall. Today's talk is celebrating culture in the city, and it's going to be given by Geordie Selkirk and Kenneth. They are with Perkins+Will. It's the Durham office of Perkins+Will, which was merged with the Freelon Group. They have an impressive portfolio that populates North Carolina as well as the nation, with such gems as the National Museum of AfricanAmerican History and Culture in Washington, D.C., as well as the Harvey B. Gantt Center in Charlotte. In this presentation, the firm will be talking about the importance of architecture in the urban context and the award-winning cultural institutions they have designed. Please welcome Geordie and Kenneth.
Thanks, Beth. Okay. Well, thank you for coming out here on a Monday afternoon, and we appreciate being able to share with you some of our portfolio. One thing I'll say, so Geordie and I have been working together for several years now. Geordie heads up our urban planning and
we call it Cities and Sites.
Cities and Sites. We recently renamed it, so I've got to get that on board. But he's very active with the North Carolina practice in helping develop urban design and urban projects for us. We also have an office in Charlotte, so it's really interesting that we get to work a lot here in the RTP, or in the Triangle area, Durham, Raleigh, as well as in Charlotte, and the cities are quite different, and that's not what we're going to talk about today, but it does give us an opportunity to really explore a lot of interesting things. Geordie he leads that aspect of the office. I work as a design principal and help lead the overall design for the office in the North Carolina practice. So what we want to share with you today is we're going to share six projects. 5 of them one's almost finished built. And we selected these because they are 5 examples of the way that we're engaging urban context. And there's a lot that could be said about American cities. One thing that could be said is that they have a consistency of erasing and remaking and erasing and remaking of themselves over time. And each layer then, of course, adds to that. And this erasure, whereas in other cultures and in older contexts, that came very often with in a more violent way with war and all. But this is something that we, as a process, have kind of brought to our own cities as a way of making. And it has its ups and downs, but what that leads to, though, is a multi-layered urban context that has a lot of stories, and those stories are not always erased when you tear down and make new. The old stories are still there, sometimes just under the surface, sometimes around the edges. Sometimes there's nothing physical left, but their stories are still there. And Geordie and I, having come from the Freelon practice, a large portion of our portfolio and our work was about working with institutions to bring those stories back forward and through architecture retell those stories, either tell them anew, recreate them, or even restore them in some context. So what we're going to do today is share with you 5 of these types of projects. They're all museum projects. And then at the end, we'll share one project that is a design competition that we just completed in Dallas, Texas. And it's a new twist on things as well, but still about telling stories. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Geordie and let him take you through a couple of projects.
Thanks. As Kenneth mentioned, I am, now that Freelon has merged with Perkins+Will, I have taken up the moniker to lead the what we call the Cities and Sites group here in North Carolina. So a lot of these projects that we present here have urban impacts, and so I think one of the things that we really enjoy about this type of design is how to knit the projects into its place. And so the first project that we're going to present is from San Francisco, actually. Far afield from North Carolina, but there was a community of African Americans in San Francisco that arranged with a large-scale developer who developed the St. Regis Hotel, which is a major block in the Mission District in San Francisco on Mission Street, and carved out a museum out of the base of the building. So the way the building is experienced from the Mission Street side is a presentation of this museum. And it's a museum of the African diaspora, so it's all about how the African culture was dispersed throughout the world. And so that's the story that they were telling. So what the museum tried to do was retell that story in a way that brought people into the spot here. And as Kenneth mentioned, it was based on the notion of storytelling. So the experience of the museum, separate from the architecture, somewhat, the exhibits were designed around storytelling. But the experience of the architecture is very much a story, because what you'll see is a mural that is presented to the street of this girl's face, done in a way that was and you've seen it before, I'm sure, multiple photographs to be able to make up a large sort of pattern of lights and darks to be able to create the face. As I said, it's positioned next to Yerba Buena on Mission Street. The St. Regis Tower is this a laser pointer? Well, you can see where it's, whoops, sorry. You can see where it's based here, and where the arrow is. So it's on the base of that building. It's actually on the Mission Street side, which is on the opposite side of that image. And so it was reaching out to the street to draw people in. So that was basically the concept. And how do you do that on a street? Well, you do it by, is there a laser pointer on this?
There is. Yeah, there you go.
Is this it? There we go. Yeah. So this whole facade is transparent with a stair going up and down through the floors. And then this wall behind it is where this mural of the girl is. And then this canopy, there's a canopy that sticks out through. This is basically the concept with the stair. And then this is the sort of image of the mural. And you can see that the mural is right there facing the street, and everyone experiencing the street gets to experience the mural. And so we think that urbanistically, that this is incredibly inviting for people to go in and makes it a friendly place, as opposed to the rest of the building, which was parking all behind it. And then the lobby of the hotel is over here. And then, of course, the hotel or offices start for, I don't know how many stories, maybe another 12 stories, and then it's hotel above that. So it's a mixed-use building. And then the next project, coming back closer to home, is in Greensboro at the International Civil Rights Center Museum, which is celebrating I guess you could call it one of the birthplaces of the civil rights movement, where the four students from NCA&T went and sat in the counter at the Woolworth store. And so this is a historic building that we were engaged to sort of celebrate the relic of the place, and then also the moment of the sit-in. And this is right downtown, and this place was boarded up for years, and so it's just sort of a vacant place on the street for the longest time. And when the museum finally got its funding together with using historic tax credits as well, they were able to renovate the entire thing, and which we went through the State Historic Preservation Office, which was, you need to do for doing historic tax credits, and National Park Service. But the lobby space here is the original architecture, just made a little bit more fundamentally plain, so that other things could be, the intervention into that space, be celebrated. So you can see here, the historic architecture is represented by these cornices, but we used it to create lighting and everything. And this is the entrance to the experience, which went down into a sort of a darker space. So it was a transition from light to dark, which was occurring here. And then this is a historic Woolworth staircase that went down to a gallery, just an open transition, temporary gallery space. And these are some examples of the exhibits, which we did not design the exhibits, but we do that with museums where we hire exhibit designers and we work with them to coordinate how to create the architecture around them. And the famous counter. And there's lots of production that goes into these museums with creating the kind of video experience that people would have when they went and sat at the counter. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of coordination to go on with the production of these museums. And next, Kenneth is going to talk about the Gantt Center.
One thing, in this idea of storytelling that I would mention about the first two in contrast, as Geordie was illustrating, the first one, we were able to bring the story out to the street and really make it a part of that urban street life there. The second one, because we were working with this historic element, the old Woolworth store, and the original lunch counter being down in what we would call the basement level, we had to work at drawing you in and bringing you down, because there was a lot of story to be told before you get to that lunch counter, but that lunch counter is the most important thing because it so strongly represents a huge, the beginning of a huge movement that by the end of 1960 had spread like wildfire all across the U.S. So it's different ways within the urban context of responding to these opportunities. So the Gantt Center in Charlotte represents yet another one, because if the first one, the Diaspora, was about bringing stories together that had been dispersed across the globe and trying to find an opportunity to tell those in one location, the second being more a very specific story about that place. The Gantt Center is about a place, but at the same time, that place has been erased through urban renewal and things like that. So it's in a part of Charlotte that today looks nothing like it did half a century ago. And it is in a museum district there, so there's several other museums nearby that I won't go through all of those, but it's quite an active area there. Now, the site is the proportions of the site were very residual. And we'll show you a plan in a little bit, but it was a very challenging site to work with. But, and here's a section of that. The site, so I'll just tell you, so it's about 40 feet by about 400 feet long. It was very much residual. No one thought that you could build on it, but it was kind of offered up as sort of, here, if you want to do something with it. And the folks at the institution they were like, yeah, let's do something. And we looked at it, and they weren't quite sure, but we took a few days and did a brainstorming, and we decided that yes, we could indeed do something with that.
It's actually over the service entrance to the tower across the street.
Exactly. So this is a tower that you'll see in this section here. And so the museum actually sits atop of 2 truck ramps and vehicular ramps to underground garages that are across the street. So we had this very narrow space to work with, and then we lifted up above that and built the museum. But we were able to touch the earth on either end of these ramp areas, and that gave us the opportunity to, as it turns out, tap into some of the history of the community there. The community used to be a very vibrant, rich community, and part of that community was what became known as the Jacob's Ladder School. And the reason that it became known is that at graduation each year, the students would gather around and on this stair that became known as the Jacob's Ladder Stair. Of course, the analogous to education as the opportunity to move upward. Jacob's Ladder, of course, and the analogy, or in the biblical story, and it all works well together as part of reinforcing the education, the value of education for that community. Well, of course, urban renewal, when it came along, always took the path of least resistance, which meant it very often decimated African American communities. Well-established, thriving communities were wiped out. And the Jacob's Ladder School was part of that. But as we studied this, we also studied contemporary quilting and patterning that might also bring us inspirations that had been brought to our context here. So we had this historic context that had been erased. We had these other inspirations that were gathered together, we worked with those together to develop a concept that was based around movement through the building that would be inspired by the Jacob's Ladder School and then wrapped in a building envelope that would help tell the story of the Africana art that this was and history that the center is charged with bringing forward. So the ramps, that it sort of jumped back from concept into the resolution of the site, which is pretty interesting, I think, is at ground level there are 2 ramps that start down with trucks at this end and move down underneath, and then at mid-block on top of those 2 are 2 more ramps for vehicles, passenger vehicles moving down, and then threaded between all of that, if you couldn't pack enough on the site, we then put an entrance plaza, a main lobby and gift shop here, as well as another entrance on this end. And those 2 entrances then rise up and they meet in a sky lobby of sorts up above all of the ramping, and then off of that are the galleries. So the galleries move along in this way. And so this is the building. This is not a touched up photo. It really is this skinny and long. But you can now see the quilting patterns projecting themselves onto the facade there. And then at that mid-block, to tie it all back together, these are the lobby spaces up above that overlook the city. I'll go back to that other image in just a moment. But these ascend up to this midpoint, and then you have this vista back over the city. One of the other interesting challenges about this is that it has this long street frontage. The opposite of that street frontage was 400 feet of party wall, and which even today is still a parking lot, but as the city evolves, we knew that eventually another building will be built there. And so we brought, we were also very thin on money at that point for this backside, but so this is concrete, but then just using some bent aluminum elements and lighting, we were able to bring that quilting pattern even onto this 2-hour party wall, so that as it looks back, and this wall faces the main part of downtown, so as it looks back to downtown, it announces itself the same patterning in 2 different ways. And this is another view of that space just inside there. So another project, the 4th one, is the National Center for Civil and Human Rights in Atlanta. We finished this last year in June, just not even a year ago. And this project is really about telling a story of the past, but blending that with the present and the future. The American Civil Rights Movement has really been what was and still is a huge inspiration for global civil rights awareness around the world. And the Center and it's in its name, the Civil and Human Rights. It's telling the American civil rights story, and we worked with George Wolfe and to help. He was the storyteller. He's an amazing storyteller from New York, and he was the exhibit storyteller, and it was quite a charge. How do you tell the American civil rights story again, but in a fresh way that it lends another perspective on it? And I think he did very well with that. And then we were charged with the architecture and how the architecture can embody both the past, the present, and the future. And as we studied the American civil rights story as well as contemporaneous events, while we were doing the design, this was when the Arab Spring was really taking hold. And we started noticing some correlations between our own events, such as the March on Washington, and other, in Birmingham and other urban places, as well as contemporary events in Cairo or in China, or even at Wall Street, the City and Wall Street movements. And the thing about them was that these events where people were coming together to make progress happen, they were happening in open urban environments. And this was as we looked at it further, this was very consistent, where urban environments, these open spaces, became these gathering places where people could make progress for humanity. And so we were inspired about having a space for action, as we called it. And so this is the concept sketch where the elements of the architecture in an abstract way begin to express or define this context in which progress could happen. This is a site plan of the project. It sits in a part of downtown Atlanta that is between the World of Coca-Cola, if you know Atlanta, which sits here, and the Georgia World Aquarium. So we were between sugar water and salt water, and we called ourselves sort of the healing waters of the center. And so we were there with these other attractions. But the interesting thing from an urban perspective is that, and we had a lot of conversations with this during the designing, Coca-Cola was very generous in giving the land and a lot of money for the center. But we realized that the demographics of the sort of the families coming here and here for entertainment, that we had a much more serious subject matter to deal with, and how we could delicately sort of work with them so that we could serendipitously capture that audience and bring them in. as well as then the center itself, and it's very much becoming this. It's a destination of its own now. So folks will come to, maybe families with small children will come to see these events and hopefully have an opportunity to experience this. And then, you know, maybe the inverse is becomes a stronger and stronger destination here for itself. The crafting of those walls became something of great study. These are a collection of a few of many studies that we did, but it became a challenge within the city because we didn't have a conventional street frontage. We broke most of the rules that they had because the rules were written around a conventional building being built square to the street and holding that. And we were set in a park-like setting. And so the city, we had to work with them to interpret creatively. And they were very cooperative and collaborative. And I think that the end result turned out very well. We offered back to the city large plazas and entertainment that they may not have had if we had strictly followed the rules. The facades, symbolically, they're all various shades of warm tones, earth tones, and we did many studies, but all of these studies were lending themselves toward trying to find an appropriate expression. It's very much a straightforward metaphor of that all humans are essentially various shades of the same color. Our skin is, and so the richness of humanity is trying to be captured in the facade, and we did a lot of studies with that, and the windows looking back to the city. And so at the end, this is the end result overlooking the plaza at one level, and you might be able to tell from, but maybe in another photo, that there's about 30 feet of fall across the site, so it's quite a steep drop off there. So we had this plaza, which opens to the Centennial Olympic Park. And then inside, the lobby looking back over that and back out to the city beyond. As you move in, you go into the exhibits, and when you come out of the second exhibits, you go into the civil rights story, which leads you up, and then you go through the contemporary human rights story. And it's about trying to inspire folks to action, but it gives you this opportunity to look back over the city as you've come through it. And then at the lower lobby opening to the street, this lobby is also the pre-function to the Dr. King's archives. And so the center is where Dr. King's archives, including letters from Birmingham and also I Have a Dream speech and other things are on exhibit at this. The Morehouse collection is here. And then connecting those upper level and the lower level is this stair, and it faces east, and we made it to be very chapel-like, and we wanted it to be very reverential to Dr. King, as well as all the other thousands of people who contributed to the progress. And this is a couple of views from the exterior. This is the lower plaza here, overlook at the street level, and then you rise up to the upper plaza along this stairway. So that's about past and present, bringing those together, different ways of engaging the urban context. The last one that we'll share with you of built work, and this is not quite fully built, but it's in progress, is the new Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. And this very much is about celebration. And it's not, even the name of it, they had to focus it with the name, but it really is the American Museum, because you cannot separate American history and African American history as two distinct things. They are one and the same. And so this is really focused not on, it does include all the stories, but it is really about celebrating the contributions that help make America what it is today. It has a very important location on the mall in DC. So of course we all know the Washington Monument, this is the White House, this is the mall, and then the Jefferson Memorial would be here at the bottom, and of course the Lincoln at the far at this end. This is the last location on the mall that the federal government or the Parks and Recreation have identified for a building site. We'll see if they stay with that, but right now this should be the last building built on the mall, at least for a few generations. And it's really, I think, very important, its location, because it is at the heart of the mall, and that symbolism, I think, is very important. When we were studying the history of the site, we found out that, of course, DC was built on marshland. So much of the mall is most of it is fill. And in fact, just coincidentally, as we studied the site, they used to have canals coming up into here when the city was smaller and having trade, and this was actually a barge where slave trading would come in and they would dock there. And so the symbolism of that, I think, is very, very powerful. Again, another story of a city that when you start to excavate, you really discover a lot of amazing things that are hidden just below the surface. This puts it within its context of these other, this is the National Archives here, and this is the new Dr. King Memorial there. And here is the site plan working. It's actually a rather small site. The building, though it's large, most of it is below grade and required considerable, most of the construction period for the first year and a half was all below grade. And there is, as when you build on marshland and wetlands like that, there's still an underground river moving through there and large viaducts hidden under the surface to move that water. The concept for this was really based around the corona, and this is we're working with David Auger on the design of this, as well as Davis Brody Bond out of New York. And the corona, which is actually in a number of cultures does come forward as a symbol in various ways, but that really became the inspiration for the massing of the building. And then we also looked at American arts and the contributions of African Americans to the American arts, and there are many, 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 but one that we kind of narrowed in on and was particularly inspired by were the handcrafted ironwork that you find, for example, in the French Quarter of New Orleans. And I'll show you that in just a moment. This is a view of the massing as it might appear once we get done. And by the way, the panels are finally starting to go up. And I'll show you some mock-ups that we had built of that. At the ground level, it was very, very important that this be a museum that is as welcoming as possible. This is post 9/11, so there were a huge number of security obstacles to overcome. So within things such as reflecting pools serve dual roles as inspiration and as security barriers for things. But fortunately, unlike most of the other museums on the mall, the security, queuing, bag check, all of those things we were able to build into the and plan for. And so when you go to DC today, it's still very awkward in a lot of these, and it was clearly the museum wasn't planned for, and it impacts the relationship between the street experience, the lobby experience, and the exhibit experience, and in a negative way. And what we were trying to do is very much overcome that in the organization. But transparency out to the surrounding context is very, very important. At the ground level, horizontally, and as you move up, you begin to you get a sense of the scale of things, the magnitude of the building, but also the contributions and what's in the exhibits. And then those have particular vistas back out to the city around, except nothing can look at the White House. So we had to make very clear, or we had to be very careful that there were no direct views to the White House. And then there is also a fountain of inspiration there in the lower level. So this is seen at the plaza level. In fact, you can see the building form rising up above that, and then down below that garden is this fountain, place of inspiration. These are some of the design models that we built along the way. This is that fountain here. Most folks will enter on this side, which is facing the mall. So you consistent with the other Smithsonian museums, more or less, is they all front onto the mall, but this, of course, has to be a building in the round. We have a lot of truck ramps coming down and below, so that we have to work with that as well. So this was the corona, the screen around the corona. This is some of the inspirations where this is from New Orleans, and if you know the architecture there. And then beginning to abstract that in an interesting way that begins to bring it into a more contemporary expression. These are some of the studies that we did. We built a lot of models, and we built full-scale models. So this is all at the contractor's yard, where we were building full-size mock-ups of the building. And today, this is not a very old photo. So you can see the steel coming up. All of that armature is hung off of these large concrete masses that are the structure and the vertical circulation and all of that. And as it moves up, this is the view back to the Washington Monument. Little point of trivia, the angle of repose here on the monument is the exact same angle that the panels will be on the corona expression someday. So you got a little trivia hopefully they'll build it just like that. So that those are 5 projects that we built in 5 different cities, and they tell stories in 5 different ways. And as Geordie and I mentioned earlier, that was our way of our through storytelling and architecture within an urban context. That's how we try to bring projects to have a relevant relationship with their context. And of course, with each of these, there were different urban design challenges to work with. The last element that we'll share with you is a project that we are competing for. We did a design competition. It was an invited competition, and it's in Dallas for the Schramm South Asian Museum and Learning Center. And we wanted to share this with you because this is a different, the first 5 projects were telling stories that were already there. The Schramm competition was about trying to bring a story and plant a seed within a growing city, downtown Dallas. It's an older city, but nevertheless, the South Asian community in the Dallas-Fort Worth area is growing. There's about 250,000 in the most recent census. But the point of this was that Dr. Jain, who is leading the Schramm Institution, very much wants to try and bring that culture and share it with the Dallas community and the North Texas community. The competition called for 3 different designs, which is unusual. Usually we do 1 design in 1 competition. We had to do 3 designs within the same time period. But we came up with 3 ways of telling that story. And I'm going to go through these quickly so that we have time for discussion. But it sits in a part of Dallas near downtown. It's 4.9 acres of land on This is 2 blocks that were conjoined and that they'd taken the street out at one time. It's a large parking lot, and this is another parking lot. So altogether, that's almost 5 acres of land in downtown Dallas, which is a huge amount of open land for being privately owned. And it sits right on the edge of the museum district. So the museum district in Dallas, the arts district, I should say, is along here, along Woodall Rogers Freeway. The heart of downtown is over in this area. This is a new portion of downtown that, again, another story we discovered along the way, that this portion of downtown before Woodall Rogers Freeway went in was historically the Latino and African American communities, which, again, they were raised for building freeways, and very, very little, if anything, exists of that today. But it is being redeveloped rapidly with new urbanist guidelines that I think it will make it a very walkable part of downtown. This is the historic warehouse district of Dallas, and the book depository is right here. That's from which John Hinckley.
Not John Hinckley.
I mean
Lee
Harvey Oswald. I'm sorry, shot Dr. being President Kennedy. So, but there's another museum here, there's the aquarium here, there's the Perot Center of Natural History here. Interesting thing is this small museum here, they call it the Dallas World Aquarium. This is the Perot Center. This had a big budget, Ross Perot. This kind of grew from a small aquarium in an old building to another old building adjacent, and then they leaped over to the next street. But these two museums are entertainment and education museums. They alone turn out more revenue than all of the rest of the arts district combined. So there is an understanding that there are different, the city really promotes this a lot, and it's great, the arts, but bringing in busloads of children, hundreds of busloads of children every year really really generates a lot of revenue. The situation of the Schraman at this location then was very wise, because he selected this location to be between these two other institutions because of that opportunity for education. These are really focused on education, and that's really what the Schraman is trying to promote. So the first concept was inspired by the notion of absence, and Jainism as a philosophy and as a religion puts an emphasis on the emptying of oneself in order to be able to allow a greater level of awareness to enter. And so the value of the absence and the humility of the absence was one inspiration. Here are our concept sketches here, and this one really tried to play off of the different paths through the site, connecting the context, and where the strength of this project, similar to an urban street, the buildings are one thing, but it's really the street, it's the life of the street that makes a city great. And we were inspired by South Asian street life that some of it, these are more contemporary constructions, but also very historic streets. Here's a view moving into that space, and also the scale of the street, the compression, oversized streets became, and Dallas has a lot of them, they're very vacuous, and this really was trying to recreate a more compact pedestrian scale streetscape in that regard. And here's the view of a lot of the site was left open for parkland, and that was a requirement of the competition. The second concept was inspired by the Lotus, and the Lotus plant is symbolic of this rising from the dark up into the light as it moves through water toward light and then blossoms. And again, in Jainism, there was this idea, and the reason I'm referring to Jainism, it is not a religious center, but Dr. Jain, and that is his background. And while it's not exclusive to Jainism, we were trying to be respectful of that and really try to dig deep and tell some stories in that. But the symbolism of rising up, and so inspired by the lotus plants and how they rise to the light and blossom. So in this one, we used the site where we took the program and split it and put a garden with a pool of water, and then the entrance to the museum and the main galleries are floating on the pool of water at the center of the site. These were some of the inspirations that things like the Apple stores that we all know, but also these in South Asia, these watering areas where these I'm forgetting the exact name for them, but they would dig deep into the earth to discover water, and these were very shared community assets here. I'm sorry. They weren't quite aqueducts. They were wells. They were just very, very elaborate wells that you would step wells. That was it. So they were step wells, and there were a lot of them. But this is one of the more elaborate ones here. But these are some other inspirations here. So here you see the program to either side, and the program was quite diverse with classrooms and offices and other nonprofits and things like that. The museum was actually a small component of it. Most of it was, yes, they have a small collection. It will continue to do that, but really it's about a learning center and sharing and cross-pollination of culture. So you would descend into this and then rise up into that into this gallery space, which was not for objects. It was really about an interactive, it's a space for interactive technology and learning. There's a couple more views of that in the garden. And then the last one was interconnectivity. Again, a strong philosophy of that all things are interconnected and that everything has an impact on other things. And so that mindfulness is very important. And we tried to bring that into a concept that would bring all the program around and open it up around a courtyard environment that would have opportunities to then connect back to the city around it. One of the requirements was that we take the smallest parcel of the land and develop the entire program on that. So 2 of them we used the larger parcels, and on this one we had to put it all on the smaller parcel. Dr. Jain, I'm quite certain, is planning on redeveloping what he doesn't use for the building. So we think it's a great opportunity to see if we could get it all onto the smaller parcel. So this was about 100 by 250, I believe, was the scale of. It wasn't a large block. Again, other inspirations from both past and present. And then this was the concept for this one, where the plaza, the park-like setting and places for buses to come through and drop off, a large opening on that street corner so that you could move into and through the building. So at that street level, you would not only be able to enter into this courtyard at the core of this, but you could also move through and onto other portions of other destinations in downtown. And here's a couple of, here's another view of that. And then this view is at the heart of all of that, that courtyard that rises up and gives you vistas back to other parts of the context. And then the last thing is, so this was the model that we built. That's about 4 feet by 5 feet that we built for the competition. And each of the entries were, set as a competition box, as a gift box that we gave to them. I hate that there we go. There, this is actually the most important because Geordie and I are, we're today just representing the North Carolina practice, sharing some of our work. But these are the folks that we work with every day that make it happen, and we're very proud to be working with them. And as I mentioned earlier, Geordie and I come from the Freelon side. We joined Perkins+Will in the spring of last year. And it's worked out very well because what it has allowed us to do is, our portfolio was institutional primarily, museums, libraries, college and university, civic buildings, and Perkins+Will has allowed us to expand into other areas such as what Geordie's championing, so that we're now able to engage urban design opportunities and different program types like hospitals and mixed-use development and things like that.
And commercial buildings.
And commercial buildings. So there's a lot of new opportunities out there.
Great.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.